Welcome to the Grief Pod with Venetia Quick. This is a weekly podcast which looks at every aspect of something which has or will at some point affect us all. And that is grief. Whether you've lost a loved one or about to lose someone you know, or perhaps you're simply trying to help someone navigate their grief and don't know where to start or what to say, then perhaps this is the podcast for you. Each week I'll be bringing you different stories and experiences of loss, love, hope and at times humour. On this week's episode of the Grief Pod, I'm going to take a look at a slightly different side to grief than that's the grief you go through when your pet dies. In an earlier episode of the podcast, we spoke to Dr. Amanda Roberts, who was telling us about why a person she knew suffered much more from the death of their dog than they did of their own father. So we want to talk about allowing ourselves to grieve for our pets, why we grieve so much for our pets, and whether there is the right support for those who have lost a pet. And Laoise Downes McGurk, who is the founder of Outpaws.
Hi, Venetia.
Good morning.
How are you?
Now, Laoise, for many people, losing a pet is comparable to losing a person in their life. Now, you lost your dog, Brokagh.
I did.
18 months
I
ago
did.
now.
Literally 18 months on the 14th of August. So it'll be actually 2 years. Brokagh was an incredible soul and an incredible dog. He actually came from Northern Ireland, which was a little village where my grandparents were from. And Oscoilica, Brokagh means badger warren. So he was a little badger. So there was a whole kind of emotional side for him in terms of the attachment I had with family as well. So yes, he died he died at 16.5 years of age. So he would have been, I think, 102 in doggy years.
Wow. But he was your companion
Yes.
for near 16 and a half years.
Brokagh was an incredible dog. I mean, he really was my soul dog, my best friend, my companion, my everything. And he was probably, I know he was the reason why I started my business. I think it's important that, we understand that obviously, a death of a pet is linear, it's difficult, it's traumatic, it's heartbreaking because they offer us so much unconditional love that ultimately it just pulls at our heart and our souls. And that when we have to say goodbye, it's a really difficult thing to do, and especially given that he gave so much to me, especially in times in my life where I had a lot of, personal tragedy and professional tragedy. So that was difficult for me, and he was the one consistent thing. He was my rock. He literally got me out of bed, and he made me push forward and live in the present. So he was hugely instrumental to me building a new future and starting again, Venetia. But he was a great guy. I mean, his nickname was Mr. B. Everyone who knew him loved him. He had his own Instagram page, which was Mr. Chief Outpaws. We set the tone in terms of our, I suppose, pushing boundaries in terms of bringing him into places in Ireland. 16 years ago, it wasn't as dog friendly. It was about going to restaurants, bringing him into a pub, going to a coffee shop. He kind of set the tone with that. So for me, he was an instrumental part of my life. I brought him everywhere. And obviously because I run a dog business, it was such an organic and natural thing.
Now, talking about Brokagh there, obviously, if you hadn't mentioned the word dog in any of it or whatever, people listening might go, Brokagh was Laoise's partner. And because you're talking about Brokagh in what most people would consider human terms. So why is it that it would appear that people aren't allowed to grieve their pets in the same way as we grieve humans?
I think that's a really great question, because he was in some ways like my child. I don't have children. He was such an important part of my life, and he gave me so much unconditional love that I think I put him up there on the same level as a human relationship, and withstanding the fact that it was nearly 17 years, there was so much bond built with us. There was so much trust, there was so much respect, and there was so much love. And I think people, I think that nowadays it's becoming much more apparent that people's relationships with their dogs are as important as their relationship with humans. We live in a very difficult and troublesome time, and especially coming out of COVID, animals were people's number one companion.
Especially if they were on their own, because COVID and the pandemic in general was
Absolutely.
a very, very lonely time. So for a lot of people, all they had was their pet.
And that's so true. And I actually I've spoken about that. I've spoken about that too with clients, and I've spoken about that on a previous podcast that I do myself, and that literally was one of the main subject matters that we were discussing, the fact that people, didn't have an opportunity to be able to meet other humans. They had to work from home. Their animals were actually their mental provider of being able to give them, some solace, to get out and have a walk, to clear their heads. It was scary times for everyone. We didn't know what we were dealing with, and animals were just so present and so real and genuine
and continuous, because they still want to be fed.
Continuous. Now, I mean, the flip side of that with my industry is that we had a lot of animals coming out suffering from quite bad anxiety, and because they were completely attached to their owner, so therefore when they had to go back to work and back to reality, it was very difficult for them. But I do think from that, something really beautiful came from that, because it became okay to warrant that relationship with your animal. I mean, listen, Irish people have a huge empathy towards their animals. We've always, loved our animals. I would love to see more. And it's changing, but I would love to see more respect and more openness in terms of being able to have animals everywhere. And on public transport, we're in the middle of putting something, a petition out to actually, be able to bring animals to travel on Luas or trains or buses. But to go back to your point, Venetia, I think the relationship that humans and dogs have, is it's a soul connection. And I think it runs very, very deep. And on a spiritual side, I do think that, Brokagh was sent to me for a reason. I think there was a journey that we were supposed to have together. I would do it all again.
What happened in the end? Because I often think when a lot of people have to have their animals put down, because that's seen as the most human thing to do. But yet, euthanasia or any of that side of things is frowned upon by a lot of people. So sort of human form version of putting someone down, you just don't do. So is there a massive guilt with having to put your pet down?
I'm really, really glad you asked that question, because it's something that I have battled with in my head. So first of all, I was incredibly lucky. I made the decision to put Brokagh to sleep at home. I was able to bring a vet. I was able to work with a lovely colleague of mine, Dee O'Donnell, who is a grief counsellor and a celebrant and also an animal communicator. So we were able to create an environment for him that was going to be incredibly peaceful, incredibly beautiful, and actually so serene. So when that decision had to be made, I had everything in place. That was my personal decision, because I had read a lot and I had sought advice from colleagues in my industry, and from what I believe was that it's incredibly important to be there with your pet till the end. They're your person and they need you, and from that perspective. So we set up something really beautiful in my garden, and Dee O'Donnell was incredible. She did an Irish blessing, she brought some beautiful flowers, and literally he potted around the garden, sat on the bed. It was unbelievable, as if he knew. And I wasn't able for this, but I had to be brave, I had to honour him, and I had to accept that this was the best for him. Because that's the other part of euthanasia, whether you choose to go through the vet or you choose to do it at home. you have to create the space that is going to give them what you believe is the best for them. So I was incredibly lucky in that part. I do believe our vets are incredible, and I do think they are learning more in terms of the compassion and the empathy that is needed in terms of ending, bringing your dog to the vet, ending its life. It's not an easy decision. But I do think there has to be a lot more. I do think there has to be a lot more teachings. I think people need to have more decisions, or more choices, I should say, in terms of making that decision. But ultimately, it's not an easy one.
Yeah, and I'm wondering as well about the sort of legality, I suppose, when somebody dies, you get a certain amount of time off work, and you're allowed a certain amount of time paid leave or whatever. People have birthday parties for the dogs. Yeah, I know you'd run for Brokagh.
Yes, I do. And we do birthday parties.
I think
for
something
babies.
like 70% people have more photos on their phones of their pets than they do of their children.
Yeah, I can get that.
So why is it that there's still a bit of hesitancy, like with, I know when somebody I worked with lost their dog and they were devastated, understandably, and I think they took a week off or whatever. And I remember some, like, I get it's their dog, but so how do you communicate to people that this is as important to you and your grief is as much as if it would be a human being?
It's difficult because many people actually are ashamed to maybe show their grief, which is worse because then, there's a lot of research, and there's been studies brought out that people can go into deep depressions after the loss of a pet. I think you must talk. You must talk to people. You must you must look at your resources, pet counselling, social media, reading books. Like, I tapped into so much. I tapped into podcasts, audiobooks. I read a lot. I read a lot of poetry. I actually read Professor Noel Fitzpatrick's book on the loss of his beautiful dog, Kira. He was devastated. I think Noel's dog was probably similar age to my dog. So it's about tapping in to sources to help you. There's so much out there now, actually, that you can do, but it's also about accepting the grief and allowing yourself to grieve and not be ashamed to be vocal about how you feel. So
because it's not something, or maybe it is, and I've just I haven't realised it, but it's not something where, say, down a year's time, people go, they're still looking out for somebody who's lost a person.
Yeah.
Is there the same? Do people still go, I must get in touch with Laoise because, it's coming up to Brokagh's anniversary?
Yes, and actually, I post things regularly about him. If there's a little robin in the garden that as I explained earlier on, I'm very connected with robins and butterflies and animals. If I post things about, Mr. B's robin is here, or a little memory will come up on my Facebook and I post it, it's incredible. I get messages from people all over. I mean, the one thing about Brokagh, Venetia, was that he was a magnet of positive energy, and people were really attracted to him and his love. And I met people, I probably wouldn't have even met them in my life that I'm friends with 15 or 20 years later through him. So I think when that energy is so good and so positive, then it's lovely to see. And I would get messages from people all the time. And, going back to when the death has preceded a year or two, you can open the front door of your house and sometimes it's worse because you forget and then you remember. And it's the presence of them not being there. It's not having that. It's not having your soul dog, or having your best friend, walking towards you at the front door, or wagging its tail, or just being there with you, or when you're having a bad day.
Because sometimes your pet really is your friend.
It really
so she
is.
would experience the most favourite person in your house.
Yeah,
You know?
I mean, B for me was kind of my therapy dog. I mean, as I said, I went through a difficult time in my life, and he was there. And that's the thing. Animals are so present. I think with humans, our grief is as linear and as difficult. But sometimes, it's difficult to push forward, and it's difficult for me to push forward him. But to honour him, I have to heal. And I have to be able to move forward, because that's honouring and respecting him.
Yeah, and like when you're talking like that, when a pet dies, it's quite normal, I think, for people to turn around and go, "Oh, we'll get another one, or we'll get another cat, or we'll get another dog."
Yeah,
and
I understand that too.
But is that not a bit sort of like they're easily replaceable?
Okay, I think people genuinely get a broken heart. And sometimes the best way to fix a broken heart is to walk into a pound or get a pup and be able to try and I'm not saying push that pain, push that pain away, but to feel like, that can bring love back into their lives. I mean, for me, it will definitely be, but I'm not ready. It'll be another, there will be another doggy in my life, but I'm kind of waiting for a sign, and I'm not ready, and I want to take that time. Plus, I'm running a really busy dog business. So I need to give all my time to them as well.
A lot has changed. I mean, I know in Spain, in Malaga, there's a pet cemetery that opened a few months ago, or nearly a year, and it's like done something like 67 cremations and 70 burials, which is huge. Like, this is it's really humanizing.
Yeah,
your pet. A lot of people get pets for their kids.
Yeah.
Is this, and sort of go, well, it's a good way for them to learn when a pet dies, that, which I don't do you know what I mean? I don't think anybody should get a pet. But it's also about
building a relationship for children to learn.
Absolutely, and I don't think it's sort of just there so that they understand that, death happens or whatever. Do you think by honouring and celebrating your pet, by having a proper send-off celebration for your pet, is crucial? And do you think this is something everybody should be doing?
Listen, absolutely. I mean, I was, again, very blessed. I was able to tap into some incredible resources and colleagues I know in the industry. I mean, yes, because you need to be able to have some sort of closure. You need to be able to have some finality. And it's really important to honour your pet. I mean, I filled my house with flowers everywhere. I put photos everywhere of him. I spoke to him. When his ashes came back, I worked with a beautiful, lovely lady, Jamie Maguire, who actually, her family run a funeral home, but they also started a few years ago working with the death of pets. And Brokagh's ashes arrived back to me in just such a beautiful manner. He literally, I actually cried and laughed at the same time. He arrived back in a kind of limousine, actually, in a beautiful, incredible. I went for something very simple, but he arrived back in just such a beautiful way, and they'd gone out of their way to give me his paw prints, his nose prints. They had put his hair, some of his hair, into a really beautiful glass bottle. And they arrived at my door, and Jamie's partner arrived at my door, like fully dressed in black. And it was like respecting to hand him back to me in a beautiful manner. And like, I mean, he's sitting on the side of my my dresser, my bedroom dresser, till I decide that when I'm ready, I'm going to set him free. But I think it's very important. And of course, and especially in Spain, I mean, I think they're now even actually looking at working with, I think they're actually providing opportunity for people to be able to come to their animal's wake. They can actually have an animal wake. They can actually have an animal funeral or doggy funeral, or they can just have time with their animal after they die to say goodbye. And I mean, is it very dissimilar to Irish culture? You know, we have a wake. I mean, you know, we have to say goodbye. Maybe it helps the grief.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think it gives conclusion to any sort of death. But I'm wondering where we are as a country in getting to that point and persuading people that, I mean, look, if you look at any survey of dogs in particular, in dogs' names, we're humanising dogs because we're calling dogs things like Derek or
absolutely,
Declan, you know, and you can't get more.
I mean, I can name off most of the clients, woofs that I work with. Most of them are called human names. Winston.
Yeah.
Declan.
Yeah,
Dennis,
exactly.
Safi, you know, so yeah, I mean, Zara, so absolutely. But is that not even more proof that people...
Exactly, that they're... So is this where we're going, and where is Ireland at with, you know, allowing people time off, allowing people to take the time and supporting people?
I think the average time that people are potentially, and I don't know this, so I'd have to double check, but I think it's around 2 days, which I think is ludicrous, because you can't put a stopwatch on grief. But I think it's really important that, you know, the supports are there, and I do think it's lacking. I definitely think it's lacking in Ireland. It is getting better, but, you know, you have to go out and find the resources and the help. I would love to see more grief counsellors out there working. And in fairness, I did see that I think the DSPCA and some of the animal charities are now starting to offer services in grief counselling.
Because it's definitely, I think there was a call, I think it was Dogs Trust called for more bereavement days, following like the likes of France.
Yeah, I mean, France
is so, but like I remember even as a kid being in a restaurant in France and people would have their dogs, you know, with them under the table. And this was fascinating because not that we went to many restaurants here as kids, but you'd see the dogs, you know, in the restaurant, and actually they'd be more unfriendly towards kids than they would be towards dogs being there. And
that is so interesting because if you look at the continent and you look at the relationship that people have with their pets, and you look at how open and free it is in terms of bringing your animals everywhere, like you can travel internally in France or Spain, you can bring them to restaurants. It's normal to walk through an airport. I mean, as Irish people, we look at that and go, oh my God. So maybe if those things were starting to be more available here in Ireland, you know, the whole kind of thought process of the connection with animals and the grief and the saying goodbye and the relationship in general wouldn't be such a, I suppose, wouldn't be such a difficult subject for people who don't have pets not to understand. I think if it's more open in the community, therefore it's more acceptable when people's dogs die.
Yeah, I think people would be more open and supportive.
I mean, one interesting thing, and I hope this is okay to say, but I have brought pets into some elderly,
like care homes. Yeah, and I've seen, you know, unfortunately, maybe very sick people or old people who are, you know, just bedbound and you know, not really wanting to engage with anyone, and I'll never forget this. I did particularly, this really just blew my mind, but they literally sat up in the bed when I brought 2 small dogs in. Yeah, I saw that, I think, a couple of weeks ago where they brought alpacas into a nursing home, and it's that sense of...
And they're doing it more. I mean, they are doing more in Ireland, and it is really lovely to see. I think the main point of all of this is that we got to remember how present animals are, and they provide so much for us. And as I said, in a world that's kind of, you know, very scary at the moment, it's really important that we respect and honour them. And it's okay to grieve for as long as you need to grieve. As I said, you know, it's always there. You just have to find ways to adapt yourself to dealing with the grief. But the pain never really subsides. But it just takes time. And I always like to think of when I have a bad day and I'm thinking about I'm very sad, I try and visualize him in my head, him smiling, wagging his tail, looking at me, you know, and those really help. So it's really important actually from a spiritual side that you bring together very positive thoughts of them. And I guess the same for human, you know.
Absolutely. Laoise, thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Grief Pod with Venetia Quick. You can listen on SoundCloud or wherever you get your podcasts. We also have an online community on Facebook, The Grief Pod, or on Instagram @GriefPod Series.